It was the kind of day that smelled like hope and heartbreak all at once. The church bells were supposed to ring for her, for the girl who had dreamed of walking down the aisle in a white gown since she was a child. Her name was Lila. People in her small town often saw her wheeling herself by the old bakery, her hair tied neatly, her eyes filled with quiet dreams that most had long given up on. Life hadn't been kind to her, but she never let the pain turn her bitter. Years ago, a car accident had taken away her ability to walk, and with it, she thought it had taken her chances of being truly loved. But she was wrong. She just didn't know it yet. The invitations had been sent, the dress was ready, and for the first time in her life, Lila felt like she had finally been chosen. The man she thought loved her had promised forever. He'd told her that her wheelchair didn't matter, that what counted was her heart. She believed him, maybe too much. On the morning of her wedding, she sat before the mirror, her trembling hands touching her veil. She whispered a prayer, thanking God for giving her a second chance at love. But outside, whispers were growing. Guests had gathered, some out of curiosity more than joy. They said cruel things behind her back, that no man could truly love a woman who couldn't even stand beside him. And when her groom arrived, his mother's disapproving eyes told the story before his lips did. He stood there, pale and nervous, and when she looked up at him with that innocent smile, he couldn't meet her eyes. The words fell like knives. "I can't do this," he said quietly, stepping back as gasps filled the air. Lila froze. For a moment, she didn't even understand what was happening. The world around her blurred as laughter, shock, and pity mixed into one unbearable sound. Her groom dropped the ring, turned around, and left her there, sitting alone in her white dress, humiliated before everyone she knew. It wasn't just a wedding that ended, it was her hope, crushed in public, while cameras clicked and people whispered about how foolish she had been to think someone could love her like that. When everyone left, she remained there in her chair, under the fading light, staring at the door he'd walked out from. A priest tried to comfort her, but no words could touch that kind of pain. The next day, pictures of her went viral, the poor bride in a wheelchair left at the altar. People commented their sympathy online, but sympathy wasn't what she needed. She needed someone to see her, not her disability, not her tragedy, but her. And that's when fate began to weave something unexpected. Somewhere across town, a man named Daniel sat at his kitchen table, reading the story on his phone. He was a single father, raising his 6-year-old daughter after losing his wife to cancer 2 years ago. He wasn't rich, he wasn't famous, but he understood what pain felt like, the kind that steals your breath and your peace. His daughter, Emily, sat beside him, holding a crayon and drawing 2 stick figures, a woman in a wheelchair and a man standing next to her, holding hands. "Daddy," she said softly, "maybe that lady just needs someone who's not scared to stand beside her." Daniel smiled sadly, realizing that wisdom often comes from the smallest hearts. Days later, he decided to visit Lila. She lived in a modest house near the edge of town. He didn't know what he'd say, he just felt like he had to go. When she opened the door, her eyes carried the look of someone who had cried more than she'd slept. He introduced himself gently, explaining how he'd read about what happened and wanted to check if she was okay. At first, she thought he was just another stranger offering pity. But something in his voice, calm, grounded, sincere, made her pause. He didn't stare at her wheelchair like most people did, he looked her straight in the eyes. They talked that evening about everything except the wedding. They talked about books, about life, about how unfair it sometimes was. For the first time in weeks, she laughed. That single visit turned into many. Daniel would bring Emily sometimes, and Lila adored her instantly. The little girl asked her endless questions, like, "Can your chair go fast?" Or, "Do you ever race people?" Lila found herself smiling more often, teaching Emily how to draw flowers and how to bake cookies. Slowly, her house, once filled with silence, became alive again with laughter. Daniel admired her strength, not because she survived an accident, but because she refused to let bitterness define her. He started noticing little things, how she looked out the window when it rained, how she hummed softly when she was nervous, how her eyes lit up when Emily hugged her. She wasn't fragile, she was fierce, only hidden behind scars the world didn't care to see. And Lila, though still afraid to trust, began feeling something she thought she'd lost forever, the warmth of being seen as a woman, not a symbol of tragedy. One afternoon, as they sat in the park, Emily ran off to chase butterflies. Lila turned to Daniel and asked quietly, "Why are you being so kind to me?" He smiled. "Because someone should have been, a long time ago." She tried to hold back tears, but they fell anyway. In that moment, something shifted. An invisible thread between two broken souls began to heal. Daniel didn't ask her to change. He didn't try to fix her. He simply stayed. But love has a way of testing those who dare to feel again. Word spread quickly. People began gossiping again, saying Daniel was making a mistake, that he deserved someone who could walk beside him. Even his relatives questioned him. "She's a sweet girl," they said, "but do you really want that life?" Daniel's answer was simple: "I want her. That's all." Meanwhile, Lila struggled with her insecurities. She worried she was becoming a burden to him, that maybe one day he'd grow tired of helping her. She even tried to push him away once, telling him he deserved someone whole. But he just knelt beside her, took her hand, and said, "You are whole. You just don't see it yet." That night, she cried not because she was sad, but because someone had finally said the words she needed to hear all her life. Months passed. Their bond grew stronger, built on laughter, honesty, and quiet understanding. Daniel's daughter began calling her Mama Lila, and though it startled her at first, the sound of it warmed her soul. For years she thought motherhood, love, even companionship were dreams stolen by fate, yet here she was, living them again, not in the way she expected, but in the way she needed. One evening, Daniel took her back to that same church, the one where her heart had been broken. The doors creaked as they entered, and she hesitated, memories flooding back. But he squeezed her hand and said softly, "Let's make new memories here." When she looked up, she saw the altar decorated again, not with luxury or crowds, but with wildflowers Emily had picked herself. There was no audience, no judgmental eyes. Just them. Daniel knelt before her and pulled out a small ring. "Lila," he said, "I don't want to walk ahead of you or behind you. I want to roll beside you for the rest of my life." She covered her mouth, overwhelmed. "But Daniel," she whispered, "I can't walk down the aisle to you." He smiled gently. "Then I'll come to you." And he did. Right there, in that quiet church, he promised her forever, not out of pity, but out of love. Emily giggled, throwing flower petals in the air, and for the first time, Lila felt what true love really meant. Not perfect, not easy, but real. Their wedding was small, but the world noticed again. Only this time, the story wasn't about a poor bride left behind. It was about a brave woman who was chosen, not in spite of her struggles, but because someone saw her beauty through them. Daniel's vows were simple yet unforgettable. "You've taught me that love isn't about walking the same path. It's about finding someone who makes every path worth traveling, wheel by wheel, step by step." Afterward, life wasn't suddenly flawless. They had challenges, stairs that were too steep, days when pain hit harder, moments when society's stairs burned. But together, they faced it all. Daniel built ramps in their home, Emily helped her mom paint the walls, and every corner of that little house became a reminder of love's quiet power. Years later, Lila would share her story publicly, not to seek pity, but to remind people that love isn't limited by bodies or circumstances. She spoke at community events, telling young women in wheelchairs, "You are not broken. You were built to inspire." She became a symbol of courage, not tragedy. Her voice trembled sometimes, but her message never did. The right person won't fix your wounds. They'll help you see the beauty in your scars. Daniel often watched her from the side of the stage, holding Emily's hand, smiling proudly. He knew that the woman before him wasn't the same one who had been left behind years ago. She had found her strength, and in doing so, she'd helped him find his peace too. Their love became the quiet kind, the kind that doesn't need to be shown off, only lived. And whenever people asked him why he chose her, he'd say, "Because she taught me that love doesn't need legs to stand. It only needs a heart brave enough to stay." On their 10th anniversary, they returned to that same park where everything had started. Emily, now a teenager, brought out an old drawing, the same one she made years ago. a man and a woman holding hands, one standing, one sitting, both smiling. Lila held it close, tears glistening in her eyes. "You knew before I did," she whispered to Emily. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Lila looked at Daniel and said softly, "Do you ever regret it?" He shook his head. "Not for a second. You saved me from living a half-life." She smiled. "No, Daniel, you saved me from believing I wasn't worthy of love." And in that golden light, they sat together, not as a symbol of pity, but as proof that love is not about perfection, it's about perseverance, compassion, and courage. Their story wasn't grand or glamorous, but it was true. And truth, no matter how simple, shines brighter than anything else. The world will always have its cruel whispers, its unfair standards, its doubts about what love should look like. But Lila and Daniel proved that love doesn't care for opinions, it only listens to hearts brave enough to defy them. So if you ever find yourself doubting your worth because of what you lack, remember Lila, the bride who was once rejected for her paralysis but found someone who saw her as more than her wheelchair. Remember Daniel, the man who chose love over fear, kindness over judgment. And remember little Emily, the child who saw what the world could not, that love is not about who can walk beside you, but who will never walk away. Because sometimes, the most beautiful stories aren't about people who have everything. They're about people who have every reason to give up, but don't. They fight, they hope, they love anyway. And that, my friends, is what makes them truly unstoppable. So when you see someone struggling, don't turn away. Don't let society's narrow eyes dictate your compassion. Because maybe, just maybe, you could be someone's Daniel, or their Lila, someone who reminds another soul that love, in its purest form, doesn't need perfection. It only needs presence. And as you leave today, carry this truth with you: love isn't what you see in magazines or movies. It's what happens when two broken people decide their cracks can fit together. It's quiet, it's brave, and sometimes, it's found in the most unexpected hearts.